The Nintendo Wii U is Nintendo's biggest failure ever. As a follow-up to their mega successful Wii console, expectations were high, but in the end, the Wii U only managed a measly 13.5 million units sold. That is a number so shockingly low that it almost sounds impossible. The Wii U was more than just your typical underperforming console that didn't quite hit the mark. It was universally rejected by the mass gaming market. How could this happen from a company like Nintendo, coming off the heels of their best-selling home console ever at that time? In today's video, I will attempt to answer that question by looking at the development, release, and reception to the Nintendo Wii U, while also sprinkling in my own personal experience I had with the system at the time. The Nintendo Wii lifecycle was a triumphant one for Nintendo. The Wii was an absolute phenomenon, reaching far past the typical gaming audience and bridging the gap to those who had never played video games before. But at the same time, the Wii was also an incredibly flawed console. Its focus on motion controls was great for casual gamers, but drove away the core gamers, especially towards the end of its life. Meanwhile, the Wii's extreme lack of power made it fall behind very quickly. Specifically, its lack of support for HD resolution became increasingly off-putting with each passing year. By the time the Wii was nearing the end of its life, these two issues had severely hurt the reputation of the console, leaving Nintendo in a tough position. Would they lean further into the Wii branding, cementing themselves as the one true casual console manufacturer? Or would they try to steer the ship the other way and aim to win back traditional gamers who had moved over to PlayStation or Xbox in the previous generation? The answer lies somewhere in the middle. The first reported rumor I could find regarding what would eventually become Wii U came all the way back in 2008. John Davison at WhatTheyPlay.com claimed he had heard rumors regarding Nintendo's next generation console. As he described it, it would essentially be a Wii HD, sharing many similarities to that of the original Wii console, while also adding in many modern day improvements. These modern day improvements would include features like high definition visuals alongside a bigger focus on digital content and backwards compatibility. Another line from this article that really struck me was the mention of Nintendo focusing on what the consumer will hold in their hands and interact with rather than the console itself. Many of the things reported in this article are shockingly accurate. Considering it was published 4 full years before the Wii U launched, I'm stunned by how much from this article actually came true. The HD visuals, the push for digital content and backwards compatibility, the focus on what was in your hands, aka the Wii U GamePad, all of it came true. I feel like at the time though, people didn't really pay it too much attention. The Wii was still relatively new and in its prime in 2008, so people weren't interested in a new console yet. And so for the next few years, Davison's report was pretty much all we had to go off of until 2011 when rumors really started to ramp up. This is where the console gained the code name of Project Cafe. Project Cafe was also often referred to as the Wii 2 around this time. Many of the rumors and reports around the console lined up with what Davison had said 3 years prior, however more specific details were now becoming available. For example, specs of the console began leaking, with many claiming the power would be pretty similar to that of the Xbox 360 or PS3, and it would maybe even surpass them in some aspects. The Project Cafe rumors are also when we began to hear about the idea of a screen on the controller for the first time. At this point, Nintendo fans still weren't quite sure what to make of the Wii 2. A lot of it sounded quite promising, but there was also a lot of confusion about what exactly the console was aiming to do. Thankfully, fans wouldn't have to wait too long to hear Nintendo's official pitch for Project Cafe, as E3 2011 was right around the corner. Nintendo was busy at E3 2011, primarily promoting their newly launched handheld, the Nintendo 3DS. But towards the end of their press conference, they finally began speaking about what we had all been waiting for, Project Cafe. First off, let's get the official name for this console from then President of Nintendo of America, Reggie Fils-Aimé.
So today, welcome to the world of Wii U.
I'm sorry, I just think this clip is so funny. The way the crowd kind of hesitates for a moment before clapping because they aren't quite sure what they just heard makes me laugh every time. Yes, the name of this console is pretty weird. It doesn't roll off the tongue very well, and it's just a strange naming structure for a console in general. Despite this though, Nintendo did have a reason for going with this name, and that all came down to the controller. It's here that we see the Wii U GamePad introduced for the first time. As Reggie describes it, the U in Wii U represents the gamepad and the way in which players can have their games in their own hands. The example Nintendo gives is a father who wants to watch baseball and needs the TV. So, his son is able to transfer the Mario game he was playing right to the gamepad and continue playing uninterrupted. Other uses for the gamepad shown in this first introduction video include using it as a drawing tool thanks to the touchscreen, using it as a motion control device, or using it as a companion tool to games taking place on the television screen. The gamepad controller would even even have some smartphone capabilities, such as a camera for video calls, alongside the ability to flip the view of the controller from horizontal to vertical. This trailer they showed did a pretty great job representing just how versatile this controller could be. It was presented as more than just a gimmick, it was truly the basis of everything you would be doing on Wii U. After this video, we hear from then president of Nintendo Satoru Iwata to learn more about the console. Iwata is quick to point out that the Wii U is going to cater to, in his words, the most experienced players. I thought this was important to note, as from day one, Nintendo was trying to walk the tightrope of being a Wii successor, while still attempting to cater to a more hardcore audience. Nintendo's messaging for the rest of the event was a lot of reiterating the same few points. The Wii U gamepad would allow you to play games off the TV. Meanwhile, the controller could be used in all sorts of ways in the games that you do play on the TV. Notable games shown for the console included what would become Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, New Super Mario Bros. U, and LEGO City Undercover. At this point in the conference, it's time for everyone's favorite third-party sizzle reel, where all of the developers tell their totally true and honest thoughts on the new system. As always, they raved about the new power and possibilities that would come from working with a new console. Even though it is all just business speak at the end of the day, and we see developers say this about every new console, it was nice to see companies who had not supported the Wii come back and support Wii U. If Nintendo wanted any hope of the Wii U catering to hardcore gamers, they would need these third-party developers on their side. And for the time being, it appeared those third-party developers were in. That was all we got from Nintendo's first reveal for Wii U. I'd say it went pretty well, right? They showed some cool new features, talked about some exciting games, and called it a day. But as it turns out, Nintendo had made a crucial mistake throughout this press conference. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed it. You see, Nintendo never really showed off the console itself. They only ever focused on the GamePad controller. Let's take a look back at that Wii U introduction video we talked about earlier. Throughout this video, the actual console can only be seen for a few short moments here and there, usually in the bottom right corner of the screen. Meanwhile, the video refers to the new controller 9 different times, and yet never says the words new console. This last shot we see here is the best representation of the problem, proudly displaying the GamePad controller with no console in sight. Some of you may be wondering what the big deal is. Who cares if we see the console if the GamePad is the selling point? And Nintendo was probably thinking the very same thing. They seemed under the impression that everybody already understood this was a new console with a new controller. And yes, any fan watching a live E3 showcase is probably informed enough to understand that this is a totally new console. But what about the casual consumer? The person who doesn't have any idea what E3 even is and just suddenly sees a Wii U trailer uploaded to YouTube. To that casual consumer, it seemed like Nintendo was simply marketing a controller, not a brand new console. It didn't help that most of the games Nintendo showed throughout the video looked like games that already existed. That looks like New Super Mario Bros. Wii. That looks like Wii Sports. And that looks like Wii Fit. Combine that with the somewhat unusual name Wii U, and many people understandably thought this gamepad controller was just an accessory for the Wii. This perception that the Wii U was an add-on for Wii and not a new console would end up haunting them for the next several years. Nintendo did so much right throughout their E3 2011 showcase, but this one blunder totally ruined it all. For the next year or so, Nintendo scrambled desperately trying to find new ways to ensure people understood this was not just a peripheral. Thankfully for them, they would get one more chance at E3 2012 to get their message across. E3 2012 was going to be a massive moment for the Wii U. Nintendo was going to have to find a way to ensure consumers understood this was a new system, while also selling them on why they should want it in the first place. You will notice right away this new image Nintendo used for most of the Wii U's life cycle, featuring the gamepad controller sitting right next to the console. There's no doubt in my mind this image was chosen as a direct response to the E3 2011 mishap. To start off this Wii U showcase, Reggie talks about how the gamepad controller will change the way you interact with your media, but honestly, he kind of says a whole lot of nothing here, constantly reiterating that the gamepad will revolutionize your living room, but never giving any actual example of how it will do that. I think this is the first sign of Nintendo not quite knowing how to sell this thing. They knew it was a fresh idea that hadn't been done before, but I don't think they knew how exactly they were going to best use that fresh idea yet. And that is a problem that we will see repeating itself throughout the console's entire life. Throughout this whole presentation, I think the game that best sold the GamePad was surprisingly Zombie U from Ubisoft. At the time, Zombie U was a really intriguing game, specifically its use of the Wii U gamepad. Ubisoft came up with some awesome ideas here, such as using the gamepad screen to scan your surroundings or manage your inventory without ever pausing gameplay. They also showed this really cool clip where the player is hitting numbers on a keypad on the gamepad screen while zombies rush them on the TV screen. And it feels weird to say, but I really do think Ubisoft did a better job selling the Wii U with this Zombie U trailer than Nintendo did with any of their first-party games shown, which included Pikmin 3, New Super Mario Bros. U, and Nintendo Land. No offense to Ubisoft or Zombie U, but that's probably not a good sign. After a few more game announcements, the showcase ends with no mention of a price or release date. Overall, I wouldn't say it was a terrible conference, but I don't think it was good enough as the last main showcase before a console's launch. The games shown were good but not always great, and it seemed that Nintendo was still struggling with messaging of the console. There were a whole lot of buzzwords without much substance. Nintendo's biggest fans, myself included, were obviously excited, but we were going to be excited no matter what they showed, simply because it was the next Nintendo console. The bigger challenge is getting the more general gaming audience to care, and I'm not sure they achieved that with their big Wii U showcases thus far. A few months after E3 2012, Nintendo announced the pricing and release details for Wii U. The console would launch in North America on November 18, 2012, with a release in other regions coming soon after. The Wii U would have two different models, Basic and Deluxe. The Deluxe model would have 32GB of space, while the Basic model would only have 8GB. The Deluxe model would also feature some extra add-ins, most notably Nintendo Land being included. The Basic model would retail for $300, while the Deluxe model would be $350. Overall, I think the price of this console was fair, especially considering the controller itself was essentially a mini tablet. However, the Basic set felt very bare bones compared to the Deluxe set. Only $50 more for a Deluxe set that had more storage and included a game made the Basic set feel overpriced in comparison. I actually think Nintendo would have been much better off just having one model, being the Deluxe set. But regardless, launch was approaching fast. Nintendo may have struggled to convey what exactly made the Wii U great in their marketing, but now players would have the chance to get their hands on it and see for themselves. As November 18th approached, hype among Nintendo's faithful was extremely high. In many ways, the Wii U felt like Nintendo was finally entering the modern era, and fans couldn't wait to see the new gamepad controller in action. The launch lineup of games was nothing too crazy, but it was solid, featuring a new Mario game on day one alongside a plethora of third-party support from just about any relevant series or company you can think of from that time. Initial sales of the console seemed promising. CNET reported that Nintendo had sold around 400,000 Wii U consoles within the first week, and Nintendo told CNET that number could have been even higher, but they sold out of their initial stock. Sales continued well through the holidays, as is to be expected, and by the end of 2012, Nintendo reported 3 million Wii U consoles had been sold. Things looked to be going well, but then the problems began. For the early adopters getting their consoles in this time period, reception was mixed. First off, the console was incredibly slow. The system would have constant loading screens to get to just about anything, whether it was opening the eShop or your friends list. Even simply accessing the Wii U's main menu could stick you with a loading screen that lasted over 10 seconds. That may not sound like a lot, but a 10-second loading screen every time you try to access anything on your console really adds up fast. And I'm being generous with the 10 seconds, by the way. It would often take even longer than that. Another long loading screen came when wanting to play Wii games. The Wii U was fully backwards compatible, which was great, but in order to play those games, you had to open the Wii menu, which would cause a full system reboot every time you wanted to play a Wii game. Meanwhile, the system was lacking some modern day features that players had been hoping for, most notably party chat and an achievement system. But at the end of the day, the Wii U was going to live or die by its main feature, the gamepad. And unfortunately, the gamepad was pretty underwhelming early on. The battery life was awful, only lasting around 3 to 5 hours. You pretty much had to always be near an outlet if you wanted to play for any significant amount of time. Meanwhile, the gamepad's ability to play games off the TV was great, but its range was short. Now, Nintendo never claimed this thing was a portable device, I totally get that, but I expected it to go farther than it does. I remember testing it out at the time and I could barely make it to the next room before the gamepad would lose its connection. This meant playing games off the TV would have to come in a very specific scenario where you were sitting in close proximity to the TV but couldn't use it for some reason. As for the games themselves, it seemed developers were struggling to find meaningful uses for the gamepad. Some games used it very well, specifically basically the tech demo style packing game Nintendo Land. What impressed me most at the time were the Nintendo Land game modes where 4 players could look at the TV screen while a 5th was given a completely different perspective on the Wii U GamePad. That's a really cool idea, and it was something that was never really possible before in a local play setting. But besides Nintendo Land, most other games, even those from Nintendo themselves, had half-baked GamePad features, such as New Super Mario Bros. U simply letting the GamePad player place random blocks on the screen. It seemed many developers, even Nintendo themselves, were still trying to figure out how to use the device effectively. Perhaps as a result of these many issues, Wii U console sales nosedived immediately following the 2012 holidays. In February 2013, it was reported that the Wii U had only managed to sell 57,000 units throughout the month of January. This number was shockingly low. For context, the Xbox 360 sold 281,000 units that same month. This number was also significantly lower than what the original Wii console had sold in its third month on the market, which had sold 400,000 units in January 2007. Nintendo tried to find a positive spin on things, but there was real cause for concern here, and unfortunately for Nintendo, things were only going to get worse. The slowing Wii U console sales came right alongside a massive game drought that any Wii U owner of the time will remember. The first half of 2013 was unbelievably slow for a console that had just launched. From January to June, we got almost nothing of relevance besides LEGO City Undercover and Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. Both great games, but not enough to carry 6 months of time. In terms of Nintendo first-party games, we didn't get any until June of that year with Game & Wario. Then it took 2 more months to get an actual good Nintendo first-party game, with Pikmin 3 finally snapping the drought. This lack of game output hurt the already floundering Wii U console sales even further, and third parties were starting to take notice. In 2013, Ubisoft announced that only 4% of their third quarter software sales came from the Wii U, despite releasing 7 different games on the platform in that time. Terrified by this number, Ubisoft took away Wii U exclusivity of Rayman Legends and delayed the game by 9 months. As a huge Rayman fan who had a Wii U, I remember this like it was yesterday. I was so upset. But even with my personal Rayman fandom aside, this genuinely was a huge loss for Nintendo. Not only did they lose what would have been a big exclusive game, but that exclusive game would have also helped break up the early 2013 game drought. It also put the relationship with Ubisoft into question, and they had been one of the biggest supporters of the console before release. Meanwhile, Electronic Arts announced in June 2013 that they had no Wii U games in development and said in the nicest way possible they were done with the platform. At E3 2011, EA had been given their own segment of the showcase to promise their support. Just 2 years later, they had already dropped the Wii U entirely. 2013 also saw the release of new PlayStation and Xbox hardware with PS4 and Xbox One. The Wii U was fairly on par with PS3 and 360, and so developers could reliably port most of those games to it. But with the release of PS4 and Xbox One, Nintendo's machine was now underpowered, giving third parties who had tried to stick by it all the more reason to move on. It wasn't long before pretty much any game that wasn't meant for kids or had some connection to Nintendo was skipping the platform. Lack of third-party support is a problem that Nintendo has faced quite often, and they are usually able to overcome it because their first-party output is so consistent in terms of both quality and speed of releases. But throughout the Wii U's life so far, Nintendo's first-party output was struggling to pick up the slack. The year did end well with Super Mario 3D World, but sales were not improving. By the end of 2013, the console had sold around 5.8 million units. This number was only slightly higher than what Nintendo had originally projected the console to sell by March 2013. So let me say that again, it took Nintendo the entire year to barely squeak past what they had expected to sell by March. This was code red, and 2014 would have to be a big year if the Wii U stood any chance of a comeback. 2014 saw some huge releases for Wii U, most notably Super Smash Bros. And Mario Kart 8. If any of Nintendo's games were going to draw people in, it was going to have to be one of these two. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. Both games came out and were universally praised. People who had a Wii U bought them and loved them, but still the mass gaming market just didn't care. After 2 full years on the market, the Wii U had still not managed to hit even 10 million units sold, a number its predecessor had hit before it was even 1 year old. I'm going to skip ahead a bit here because honestly there isn't much else to say regarding the Wii U's timeline. Each year saw a few notable first-party games that were well received but never increased console sales. Meanwhile, throughout the years, Nintendo tried every trick in the book. In 2013, Nintendo dropped the price of Wii U Deluxe sets from $350 to $300. They created console bundles with just about any game you can think of. They put together ad campaigns featuring children desperately trying to explain to their parents that the Wii U was actually a new system. But none of it did anything to change Wii U's fate. By the end of 2015 and beginning of 2016, it was clear Nintendo had given up hope. They already began speaking about its successor in 2016, with the Switch releasing in March 2017. The Wii U was on the market for less than 5 full years, only managing 13.5 million consoles sold. This makes the Wii U Nintendo's worst-selling home console by far. It was truly a disastrous time for Nintendo. It was a fall from grace that most thought was impossible following the dominance of Wii. So why exactly did this happen? This is how not to save a console. First and foremost, the Wii U's most defining feature, its GamePad, was a flawed device from the very beginning. On paper, it made total sense. Tablets and smartphones were growing in popularity like crazy at this time, so giving players what was essentially a tablet controller was a pretty unique and smart idea. No one had done something quite like this before, and it continued Nintendo's trend of thinking further and trying to find the next big innovation. However, unlike the DS or Wii that came before it, the Wii U's attempt at innovation didn't quite hit the mark. The GamePad is a charming device, but it's obvious Nintendo's technology was not all the way there yet. The battery was bad, the range was shorter than expected, and it felt a bit cheap overall. In their marketing, Nintendo constantly boasted that the GamePad would change everything, but never found a way to make good on that promise. It was nice being able to play games off the TV, but if I can't walk more than 10 feet from the console, what good does that really do me? In terms of gameplay, developers struggled to find meaningful ways to use it, and this includes Nintendo themselves. Having the map or inventory on a second screen was convenient, but it wasn't game-changing enough to warrant being the entire console's identity. Meanwhile, even some of Nintendo's biggest first-party games had almost no gamepad functionality at all besides simply mirroring the image on both screens. If even Nintendo themselves were unable to find worthwhile ways to utilize the gamepad, then that means there really wasn't much there to begin with. As for the console itself, it launched in a really bad state. It was slow and was lacking many modern-day features that fans had been hoping for. Nintendo put in a lot of work to fix these things, and after multiple updates, the console was in a better place. But first impressions are everything, and these issues no doubt led to hesitation from potential gamers who may have bought in early on. On top of that, by the time Nintendo got the Wii U console into a more stable place, their competitors had released next-generation machines that now blew the Wii U out of the water. This put the system in a really strange spot. The Wii U was being sold for a somewhat similar price to its competitors, just $100 less than the PS4's launch price, but with the PS4 being so much more modern and powerful, the Wii U looked like a horrible value in comparison. With both the DS and Wii, Nintendo had shown that power isn't everything, but those consoles were often sold for significantly cheaper than the competition to offset that lack of power. But with the Wii U having a tablet controller, there wasn't room to get much cheaper. This caused Nintendo to miss out on what is often one of their biggest selling points, a more affordable console experience. Aside from the console and controller, the other most important part of any gaming system is its games. And for the most part, the Wii U struggled mightily in this department. Third-party developers ditched the console as quickly as they could, leaving long stretches of time where Wii U owners were left with nothing to play while they waited for Nintendo's next first-party release. The wait in between releases was longer than normal as Nintendo's development teams adjusted to creating HD games for the first time ever. We also have to keep in mind that Nintendo was simultaneously trying to support the 3DS, splitting up their dev teams. Because of this, the first-party Wii U game output was not Nintendo at their best in my opinion. While there are certainly many incredible first-party Wii U games, there's also quite a few key ones missing. For example, the Wii U never got a mainline Animal Crossing game, a series that had been present on every Nintendo portable and home console since the series began. And as much as I adore Super Mario 3D World, it's not a traditional 3D Mario game, leaving the Wii U as the only Nintendo home console without its own standard 3D Mario since the tradition began with N64. Finally, the Wii U never got its own mainline Zelda game. Wii U owners spent years waiting for Breath of the Wild, only for the game to be delayed so long that it ended up launching launching on the same day as the Wii U's replacement. These three examples I gave are often among the best-selling games on every Nintendo console. They are true system sellers, and for the Wii U to not have them was devastating. I would assume these games would have come at some point had the Wii U been more successful, but how is the console going to become more successful without those kinds of games? The last major point I want to make is ultimately the biggest reason why the Wii U failed in my opinion. It all boiled down to the marketing. From the very first day this system was revealed, people did not understand that it was a new console. The GamePad was always seen as a peripheral for the Wii, and I really can't blame people, honestly. There's a lot of things that went into it that made the Wii U so profoundly confusing for people. We already mentioned the E3 2011 fiasco, where they made an entire video talking about the new controller, all while forgetting to say the words new console. For uninformed viewers watching that initial reveal trailer, it totally seemed like Nintendo was announcing a new controller for the Wii. Another pivotal decision Nintendo made that hurt marketing was to stick by Wii controllers as a primary controller of choice throughout the new generation. With the Wii U being backwards compatible, Wii controllers obviously had to work on the console, but Nintendo took it a step further, with Wii controllers remaining the standard controller for anyone not using the GamePad. At first, this was seen as a nice gesture. We wouldn't have to go out and buy tons of new controllers. Anyone who owned a Wii already had them. I think Nintendo viewed this as a big selling point, with people being able to buy a Wii U and immediately have a plethora of compatible controllers and accessories at their disposal. But ultimately, this just made things even more confusing. When you watch a commercial where everyone in it is using regular Wii controllers alongside this tablet device, it's pretty understandable to assume it's just a peripheral. Then we could talk about the name of the console, Wii U. It's a very unintuitive name. There's nothing about it that really represents what the console is trying to sell you. They would have been better off just calling it something simple like Wii 2 or using a different branding entirely. Relying so heavily on Wii remotes was confusing for consumers, and going with the name Wii U also wasn't great. But I think either of those issues on their own could have been overcome. But when you combine them both together, it was a marketing nightmare. I want to tell you a quick story. It's anecdotal, but it represents this issue we're talking about perfectly. So this was right around the time Mario Kart 8 came out, and I was going over to a friend's house. I offered to bring my Wii U so we could play the new Mario Kart, and so I went over there, plugged the console into his TV, and set it all up, and then we played Mario Kart 8 the entire day. And at a certain point, multiple hours in, he turns to me and he says, "Hey, what is a Wii U anyway?" And it was at this moment that 13-year-old me knew this console was done for. If someone who had just actively used the Wii U for hours still didn't understand what it was, how could any commercial or advertisement hope to explain it? Point being, I think this console was legitimately unmarketable. But even with that said, they still could have done better here. Put the bad name and confusing concept to the side, the marketing was still a total mess. When Nintendo first revealed the Wii U, they said one of their main goals was to draw back in hardcore gamers. But within a year, the commercials on TV looked like this. It made the Wii U feel directionless. Don't spend half of the Wii U's reveal time on games like Zombie U or Batman to try and prove it's hardcore if that's not truly your intention. You are better off just focusing on what you're good at and what you know your audience responds well to. With all of this said, I think it's pretty clear why the Wii U failed so spectacularly and why Nintendo couldn't save it. The concept and console itself were flawed, did not receive adequate first or third party support, and was marketed terribly from the very beginning to the bitter end. But I don't want to finish this video on such a negative note. The Wii U is a console that I have fantastic memories with. Its many mistakes also make it very unique and endearing. There really is no other console like it. So with that in mind, let's end this video on a nicer note. Despite everything bad I've said about the Wii U so far, I think it's undeniable that it had a major impact on Nintendo's smash hit follow-up system, Nintendo Switch. The entire Switch concept of being able to take the game off the TV into your hands is basically the same concept Wii U had. The only difference is technology was now at a point where Nintendo could reliably create a hybrid portable home console system, instead of a controller that could barely extend to the next room. It almost makes the Wii U feel like a beta version of the Switch, which makes it such a cool device to look back on nowadays. I guess all I'm trying to say is that despite the Wii U's many very obvious failures, I can see what Nintendo was trying to do, and the Switch is proof that their heads were close to the right place, just not quite all the way there yet. The Wii U will forever be remembered as Nintendo's biggest failure ever, and rightfully so, but perhaps it also deserves some credit for being the precursor to what would become Nintendo's biggest success ever. I hope you enjoyed this episode of How Not to Save a Console. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, it helps out the channel a ton. If you're interested in more Wii U talk, I would recommend checking out my Wii U collection video to hear about why I chose to collect for Wii U in 2024. Thanks for watching.